Okay, so we're still in the conducting zone of the respiratory tract. We're just conducting the air that is being inhaled into the nasal cavity, the nasopharynx, the oropharynx, laryngopharynx, the larynx, the trachea, and now we're going to see that this trachea divides into the right and the left primary bronchus. Still, we're only conducting air, humidifying, filtering, warming the air that is being inhaled, making that air ready to or conditioning the air so it is in the best conditions to be for the gas exchange occurs on the most distal portion, which are the alveoli. So this is where we're going to. Now this the right and the left primary bronchi, which are also called the main bronchi, they divide in, following the patterns or segmentation or division pattern of each lung. Okay, this is what we're going to study now. What's going to happen on the right side and the left side, and we will see that each of these branches are going to divide or further branch repeatedly until we have something like this. Okay, the more distal branches, when they become less than 1 millimeter in diameter, 1 millimeter, not centimeter, that's the 10th of a centimeter, 1 millimeter, that they cannot be seen on the microscope, that's where the bronchioles begin. Okay, so let's describe the pattern of the branching pattern here. So we have the trachea, okay, and we said that right here at the carina is where it divides into the right and the left primary bronchus, okay? The right one is not shown in here, but is actually like maybe a little bit longer. It's shorter, is more vertical, so it descends more vertical than the left one, and is wider. This explains why right pulmonary infections are more common, far more common than left one, because foreign or accidentally inhaled object or any dust particle will end up mostly in the right side than in the left, just because of the direction, and it's just easier to get to the right lung than to the left one. Now, each primary bronchus, it will further divide into secondary bronchus. Okay, so we have two secondary bronchus on the left side. Why we have two on the left side? Because we have two lobes on the left lung. So one for each lobe of the lung. These secondary bronchus are also called lobar because that's what they are providing with air to, the lobes of the lung. Now, in the right lung, we don't have two, but three lobes. So on the right side, the left primary bronchus divides into three lobar or secondary bronchus. Now, these secondary bronchus branch again into several tertiary bronchi. Okay, tertiary bronchi supplies the segments of the lungs. So they're also called segmental, tertiary or segmental bronchi. And it has several patterns. It's like 5 in each lobe in the left side, and 3, 2, and 5 in the right side. In the right side. But the thing is that they branch in total in 10 tertiary bronchi on each side, on each lobe. On each lung. Now, each tertiary bronchi will keep branching again into smaller and smaller and smaller branches, and after the 20 order of or generation of branching, Like this branch has given rise to at least 300-400 millions of these little smaller bronchi. They end in the smallest of the bronchioles, which is called the terminal bronchiole. Terminal bronchiole, terminal, marks the end of the conducting zone of the respiratory tract. So up to here, up to the terminal bronchiole, only air is passing through, and the main functions is just filtering, humidifying, and warming the air that is being inhaled. After the terminal bronchiole begins the respiratory bronchiole. The respiratory zone. And remember, respiration refers to the gas exchange. So in here is where these respiratory bronchioles will lead to the alveoli, which the respiration, external respiration or gas exchange occurs. Now, as we move further or distally in the respiratory tract, some change happens on the wall of these structures. We described the wall of the trachea. Remember, it has the tracheal rings, a lot of cartilage, it has smooth muscle tissue, and the mucosa that consisted, the epithelium consisted of pseudo-stratified columnar ciliated epithelium with some cells that produce the mucus. That's the trachea, right? The primary bronchi, the right and the left, are pretty much like the structure. The wall of these bronchi are pretty much like the trachea wall. But as we move further into all of these, the terminal bronchioli, or bronchioles, they start to lose, the white is cartilage, so they start to lose cartilage. The cartilage tissue gets less and less frequent, okay? After the bronchioli, we have reached the level of our bronchioli, we don't have cartilage anymore. Look what happened with the smooth muscle tissue now, which is in red. The smooth muscle tissue starts to increase, right? We have bigger ribbons of smooth muscle tissue wrapping around these, the secondary, the tertiary bronchus, the bronchioles, the terminal. When we get to the terminal and to the respiratory portion, there is the presence of smooth muscle tissue is very important, and there is no cartilage. This is important to know because this smooth muscle tissue is under the control of the autonomic the autonomic nervous system. Now, the sympathetic branch, remember, it increases your respiratory rate, right? And also it relaxes this smooth muscle tissue, so the diameter increases. It opens up this bronchioli, so more air can get into that, and we can oxygenate more blood in the per second. Okay, so imagine sympathetic system is activated, for example, when we are exercising, right? At that moment, the respiratory rate is increased. Sympathetic activation is dilating, bronchodilating, that's the word, these bronchioles to increase the gas exchange, okay, oxygenate more blood per second, so more blood can reach the skeletal muscles that we're working on or working out. The parasympathetic, in the other hand, the parasympathetic bronchoconstrict. Now, it decreases the diameter of these the smooth muscle tissue around the bronchiole. So, parasympathetic system, remember, it acts, and when we're resting, and the demand for oxygen are pretty low. This is so basic to understand what happens during asthma. This is one of the components of asthma. During asthma, there is an increased activation of the sympathetic system and parasympathetic system. So there is bronchoconstriction. So the drugs, the inhalers, what they do, one of the components, again, is something that mimics the sympathetic neurotransmitters. Okay, so it's something that activates the sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system, and it bronchodilates the asthma. This is one of uh, the things that the fact that happens during asthma. But the other thing is that there is an overreaction of your immune system towards or against dust particles or wherever you're allergic to. And there is an increased amount of and the production of mucus, and these bronchioles get clogged, and that leads to the collapse of these alveoli, and the air gets trapped in there. We can discuss that in class. Now, so we have seen the change of cartilage. It decreases as we move toward the terminal bronchioles, yes. Smooth muscle tissue increases in amount. The epithelia also changes. The epithelia in here was pseudo-stratified, columnar, ciliated epithelia. But as we move further or distal into the respiratory tract, that epithelia becomes thinner, and now it's going to be simple columnar and then simple cuboidal until we reach the simple squamous epithelia, flat cells in a single layer. Because remember, now we want to favor the exchange of gases in here in the alveoli. So the thinner the epithelia, the best for they have a least distance that they have to cross, right, to from the alveoli to the capillary. Another change that happens is that, remember, underneath the epithelia on the trachea, we have a lot of glands that produce serous and mucus, especially mucus that help trap dust particles. Well, those glands also tend to disappear as we reach the terminal branches in the bronchial tree. And so we don't rely anymore in this layer of mucus to trap dust particles, but then we need to rely in, we need another mechanism, and that mechanism to get rid of maybe some dust particles that can reach this area. So the other mechanism is that macrophages. Again, macrophages. Okay, remember those engulfing eating cells that protect the part of our immune system that protect us from invaders. Okay, so we have described the primary bronchus divides into, we're in the left lung, so this is the two secondary bronchi. Each secondary bronchi divides into the tertiary, right? So we have at least 5 tertiary bronchi or segmental bronchi for each secondary bronchi. So remember, a primary bronchus provides air to the entire lung. The secondary bronchi provides air to one pulmonary lobe, and a tertiary bronchi provides air to a segment in the lobe of a lung. Now it branches until we reach the tiniest little tiny branches. Let's see here, we have a terminal bronchiole. Okay, as you can see, this is a terminal bronchiole, end of the conducting zone. You can see the ribbons of smooth muscle tissue wrapping around these ducts. Now, this leads to the respiratory bronchiole. This is a respiratory bronchiole, the beginning, again, of the respiratory zone. And you can recognize it because it's the one that is like popping up, right? Little balls in there. Now, each respiratory bronchiole leads to an alveolar sac. an alveolar duct. This that we can see through in there is an alveolar duct. Okay, And that whole, this alveolar duct is like holding all of this bunch of alveoli, and all that bunch is an alveolar sac. And each alveolar sac consists of several alveoli. So each of these little balls are called alveoli. Okay, so it's like a bunch of grapes. We'll always use that uh, analogy. So grab only one individual bunch of grapes, right? That little stem that is holding that bunch of grapes, that's your alveolar duct, okay? And the little bunch of grape is an alveolar sac, and each individual grape, that's an alveoli, okay? So let's try to make a section like this, okay? So we can see how it looks inside. Gosh. Like this, okay? Same structures. This is the alveolar duct, okay? That all of this is the alveolar sac, and each of the little balls are the alveoli. And all of these alveoli are interconnected, as you can see, by little pores, okay? And that way we can assure that all of the areas of the lungs, we can equalize the pressure of air that reaches all the areas of the lung. And at the same time, you can see the pores in here, we can make sure that every area of the lung, even though it has a collapsed area because of disease or an infection, it can be reached by other, alveoli and be supplied with air. Now, your lungs consist of millions of these little sacs, millions of alveoli. So imagine that you have a fresh lung in your hand and you can squeeze it, okay? How do you feel, or how do you think it will feel to have a lung in your hand? It's like you have the most delicate sponge that you can ever imagine, but it's not filled with a liquid. It's filled with air. So when you press or compress this sponge, this lung, it sounds like an air deflating, a balloon deflating. Okay, that's the structure of your lungs. Now, important to understand, so we can understand the gas exchange, that each of these alveoli are covered by a very rich bed of capillaries. Now, let's remember and let's make the connection here with previous chapters with the cardiovascular system that we will describing before this one. So let's remember that from the right ventricle comes off the pulmonary trunk. It divides carrying deoxygenated blood, which is this blue blood. It divides into your right and left pulmonary arteries. It branches repeatedly inside your lungs until we find this. This is one of the last branches of the pulmonary artery, okay, going away from your heart, bringing deoxygenated blood to the alveoli. So we are in the search or in the hunt for oxygen. So inside here, the alveoli, where every time we inhale, we're bringing air inside, and of course, what we're interested in this particular explanation is about the presence of oxygen in that air to oxygenate the blood. So the oxygen present in this air can pass through the wall of the alveoli, the wall of these capillaries, to oxygenate the blood that is flowing, the red blood cell that is flowing through these capillaries, and oxygenate the blood. So then these oxygenated blood in these little capillaries empty into small venules. Small venules merge together to form bigger veins until we have at the end two pulmonary veins on the right side, two pulmonary veins on the right, on the left, And these four pulmonary veins carrying oxygenated blood enter into the left ventricle, into the left atrium, and from there passes to the left ventricle, and the aorta pumps throughout the entire body this oxygenated blood. So this is the link between the cardiovascular system and the respiratory system. And here you can understand that we need both in excellent conditions for the other one to function properly. They are interdependent, like any other system in our body. Now, these structures that we just described, the structures that an oxygen, imagine that you are an oxygen molecule, okay, and you have to go from the alveoli into the red blood cell. Imagine yourself going through several layers in order to reach that red blood cell, okay, in the blood. So what the structures that you need to pass through or that you need to cross is called the respiratory membrane. Now, so we can understand this respiratory membrane. I'm going to briefly describe for you the wall of each alveoli. So this is an alveoli, all of these round, and another alveoli, another one. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 alveoli we have in here. And in between alveoli, we can understand in here that we have transverse sections of a blood vessel, of a capillary, because we saw how they are covered with capillaries. Now, the wall of the alveoli, we said that consists of squamous epithelium. These squamous epithelium cells are called, and I think I put it here, yes, type 1 alveolar cell. These cells in here, okay? In between or scattered through these alveolar cells, we're going to find these green ones. They're alveolar 2 or type 2 alveolar cells, and the main function is to produce this fluid, which is called a surfactant. And the surfactant is a fluid that acts as a detergent and lines all of these inner surface of the alveoli. So what it does is that it prevents the collapse of each alveoli when we exhale. It's not that when we inhale, we get alveoli full of air, right? But when we exhale, we moved out most of the air, but not all. The lungs don't collapse every time we exhale. Some air is always kept in there. And what avoids the collapsing of these alveoli is the surfactant, the presence of that film of fluid lining, okay, the inside of each alveolar. And another third type of cell that we're going to find in the alveoli are these blue cells that we introduced before. These are the alveolar macrophages, right in here. Remember, these cells are eaters, are engulf pathogens, and most of these are not going to be pathogens. Most of these are going to be dust particles. So alveolar macrophages actually live in there. They're monitoring constantly the presence of dust. They eat those particles of dust, and then they migrate to proximal parts or portions of the respiratory tract where we have cilia, where the epithelia have cilia, because remember in here this is flat cells, no cilia in here. These are just simple squamous epithelium. So it migrates where the pseudostratified ciliated epithelia is, so the cilia can sweep or move towards the trachea, these macrophages, and then we cough it up, or it moves it towards the oropharynx, up even more superiorly, so we can, from the oropharynx, we can swallow it, and these macrophages get destroyed in the stomach. Okay, so we see now that in order for an oxygen an oxygen molecule present in here. Let's use this one. In this alveoli, to move inside this red blood cell that is within this capillary, we need to, or this oxygen molecule needs to pass through first the wall of the alveoli, then the wall of the capillary, and the fused basal membranes of both of the epithelium of the alveoli and the epithelium of the capillary. Okay, so that wall, this wall, is the respiratory membrane. So in here they zoom in that, so we can see this is the inside of the alveoli with where the oxygen is. Well, there's oxygen and carbon dioxide, but in this moment, let's try to break it down into several steps. So the oxygen is going to pass through this alveolar type 1 alveolar cell. Underneath this epithelium, like any other epithelium, this is a basal membrane. Then it has to cross this is the endothelial cell of the capillary, and underneath any other epithelium there is a basal membrane, areolar connective tissue. So look, the oxygen needs to pass through the alveolar type 1 alveolar cell, the basal membrane of the alveoli, the basal membrane of the capillary, and the endothelial cell of the capillary. And you can oxygenate this red blood cell. So the red blood cell picks up the oxygen and gives up the carbon dioxide from waste, one of the waste product of metabolic processes, and empties that, following or crossing the same but in the other direction. It crosses the respiratory membrane to empty the CO2, and the CO2 is going to be expelled or exhaled. So again, respiratory membrane consists of the alveolar wall, which is the type 1 alveolar cell, the capillary wall, which is the endothelial cell, and the fused basal laminae. Okay, and that's how we oxygenate blood. Okay, see the blue red blood cell in here because it's deoxygenated. It gives off the carbon dioxide, and as it passes through, since these capillaries are very close to or firmly attached to the alveoli, the oxygen present in the air that we have inhaled can pass through, oxygenate the red blood cell. Now they're red and bright, and they can keep going to form venules, and then the pulmonary veins, and get hopefully into the left atrium. Okay, so this is how we oxygenate blood. In the next video, we're going to describe now the gross anatomy of the lungs. See you in a little while.